Greetings! It is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the history of Magic the Gathering, where I go set by set, product release by product release, and explain them to you effectively the history of all the cards released by Magic the Gathering. Alright, so today we have the start of a new block, the Champions of Kamigawa. So this was the first set in the Kamigawa block and was released on October 1st of 2004. It had 306 cards to it. Now it had the mechanics of Spiritcraft, flip cards, legendary cards, and arcane, and it had the mechanics of Bushido, Soul Shift, and split cards. Now to note, there are some interesting things. The Brothers Yamazoki card actually had two different art. It's the only set in the deck that has two different art reflecting the two brothers. All the basic lands could be combined together, their images, into one giant mural. They all fit together. Now, it had a very distinct Japanese feel, very feudal Japan, the entire set of Kamigawa, and the plane that it reflected. Now, the legendary subtype, super type, was replacing the legendary creature type that had existed before, the legendary summoning type. So no longer was something a legendary creature, it now was super type legend instead. It's also important to note that every rare in the set was legendary, and some of the uncommons were also legendary too. So this set had a lot of legends to it. Now there were some minor adjustments on the way that targeting worked in the game, but also the legend rule itself was altered. Now also, retroactively to every wall, the keyword defender was added. Before, walls themselves as a creature type couldn't attack. Now they have the defender as a keyword that's retroactively being added to all of these walls. That effectively, it has the defender ability, that's why it can attack. If it didn't have a defender, the wall could still attack. As silly as that seems. It's just that it's solidifying defender as a type that it could only block, rather than walls as being something that can only block. It's removing it from the type and adding it to the keyword. Now also, it had a return of colored mana symbols in text box, which had been actually removed since 8th edition, so this is reinserting them back into the fold. Now it was sold in 15-card booster packs, a 75-card tournament deck, 4 pre-constructed decks, and a fat pack. Now the pre-release was on September 18th of 2004, and it was a foil alternate art version of Ryu the Fallen Star. It is also accompanied by a novel. As one of the Magic Players rewards, there was a 1/1 spirit token you could get. Colorless one. Now the storyline had us visiting Kamigawa the Plane, a place where the spirits of the plane, the kami, are intrinsically linked to everything. But something occurs, and the kami begin to turn against the mortals of the plane and drive warfare against them, battle against them, try to kill them off. We focus on Machinko, the daughter of Konda, basically this powerful warlord who leaves her father's side and journeys out into this dangerous world from the protective home that her father has made for her. She seeks out monks to learn why these spirits, the kami, have turned against the mortals. Along the way, she meets others that could help her, and she even meets some unexpected allies. Folks that on her normal life she would have never allied with, but she learns on this journey that in order to avert destruction, she must make alliances with those that she never thought she would, those that may have been an enemy in a former life. Now, this entire set is made to represent this war between spirits and mortals, and the cards themselves represent this. They have the physical beings with regular magic, and they have the kamis, the spirit beings, with the arcane magic. Now this set is generally looked down upon and disliked, especially when it was on the tournament circuit, for a number of reasons. First off, flip cards were seen to be incredibly confusing. People didn't like them because of that. It was also seen to be terrible because of the legendary amount. The fact that every rare was legendary meant it was limiting in the way that you could use these rares. That was seen as a downgrade. And overall, when you compare it to the Mirrodin block and the block that will come after this, the Ravinica block, both were seen to be very powerful and powerful enough and popular, And so when you compare it to this block in the middle, Kamigawa, it just doesn't stack up. Now, as I said, there were 3 main keywords introduced to us, but it also introduced a number of concepts, including arcane, which is basically a type of instant or sorcery. And along with splice and soul shift, they were supposed to represent the spirit side of everything, the spirit magic. Flip cards themselves were supposed to be legendary, as when a card would flip, it would change from basically a ordinary folk to a legend, ready to lead the people. Now the set also featured the first legendary enchantments, the Hodens, which were uncommon too, so they were legendary uncommon. Now arcane, as I said, was actually a subtype. It was a subtype of card associated with instants or sorceries, and by itself, it did nothing. A card was arcane. Certain cards might mention arcane, but on its own, did nothing special. It was just a type. Split, and especially split in arcane, is where the first true use of it came into. Split allowed you to basically pay a cost to reveal a card and to have its effects basically be split into, in this case, another arcane spell. Effectively, I would play my arcane spell, I would pay my split cost, reveal the other card, its abilities would be added to the card I played. The one that I paid the split to arcane cost in returns to my hand afterwards. I just basically added an extra effect to one of my other arcane spells. And if I had a bunch of arcane spells with all split, I could play one, split a bunch of effects into one, and effectively have very powerful single spells, keep the rest of the cards ready to play again. Soul Shift was an ability that was on spirits, on kami. When this spirit or kami would perish, effectively go to the graveyard, it allowed you to return spirits or kamis from your graveyard to your hand. Spirit Craft was an ability that effectively triggered when you would play a spirit or arcane spell. It's just an ability that triggers with the Spirit Craft time period. Bushido was an increase to power and toughness of the creature by the Bushido number. So if a Bushido was 3, it'd be +3/+3 when it would enter into combat, effectively when it would attack or block. Otherwise, the Bushido's effect would be nothing. A flip card was a certain card that had 2 basically text box. And effectively, what you would do is when the first text box, when you put it into play, would be triggered in some way. It would instruct you when to flip this card. Then you would turn it 180 degrees, and it would be the new card, more than likely a legend, with its own text box of abilities. This is a static change that once it changes, it doesn't change again. It only flips once. You effectively flip it, it's done, there it is, you're on, got a new card, it can't flip back. Now, there were 10 cycles in this deck, in this set. First off was the Deceivers. For 1, you could look at the top card of your library. For 2, if that card is a land, which of course you'd have to reveal, then this creature gets an ability or a bonus. And these were common spirits, the Deceivers. There were the Hodens, which I mentioned before, which were legendary basic enchantments that were shrines. That was the type they had, shrine. And effectively, each one of them had an ability that during your upkeep, you would gain a numerical value equal to the number of shrines you had. So it almost wanted you to aim for that rainbow of shrines, because they were legendary and you could only have one out and play, and then their abilities would stack with each other. The more shrines you had out, of these, of course, 5 different types of shrines, the more effect. There were a cycle of legendary lands. Each of these legendary lands would tap for a certain mana, but they also would have abilities you could activate which would affect legends directly. So they were tap for a mana, or tap to affect a legendary creature, legendary card. The Myojin were powerful spirits that entered play with a divinity counter. As long as it had the divinity counter on it, the Myojin was indestructible. But you could always choose to remove the divinity counter from a Myojin for a very powerful effect. So you could choose to keep this Myojin indestructible, or you could effectively remove that to just devastate your enemy. There were the Spirit Dragons. These were 5/5 flyers that cost you 6 mana that had an additional effect when they would be put into the graveyard from play. So effectively when they die, they'd have a very big effect. There were the Zubra. The Zubra were small common spirits that when would be put into the graveyard, it would have an effect based on the number of Zubra in your graveyard. The more of them that die, the bigger the effect for all of them. There's a set of rare flip creatures. They were effectively rares to begin with, and they would flip into powerful legends. There was a cycle of uncommon flip creatures that would start out as normal creatures and then flip into legendary creatures also. There were slow lands that were dual lands that could tap for a colorless, or you could tap for one of two allied colors, and then it would not untap during your next untap phase. These were technically functional reprints from the lands from Tempest, so they were basically Kamigawa's functional reprints of those Tempest dual lands. There were flash enchant creatures, auras that effectively had flash. Now there was a mirrored pair, Ren Spirit, Ren Flesh. Each of these were a destroy target creature. One of them targeted spirits, the other targeted non-spirits. Now there were 3 reprints, including lore, one I like a lot. 16 functional reprints, including River Kajin for Horned Turtle, and 3 colors shifted, including Squelch for Bind. Now the 4 pre-constructed decks were a black-green one called Kami Reborn, a green one called Snake's Path, a red one called Spirit's Bane, and a white one called Way of the Warrior. Alright, let's talk about some of the cards from this. We have the flip card, Aki Lava Runner, which flips into Tok Tok Volcano Born. Aki Lava Runner, it has haste, and when it does damage to an opponent, you flip it. Tok Tok Volcano Born has protection from red, and if a red source would do damage to a player, it does that damage +1. Aki Underminer. If Aki Underminer deals combat damage to a player, that player sacrifices a permanent. We have the flip card Kitsune Mystic and Autumn Tail Kitsune Sage. For Kitsune Mystic, at the beginning of your end step, if it's enchanted by 2 or more auras, you flip it to Autumn Tail Kitsune Sage, who has 1. For 1, you move target enchantment enchanting a creature to another. Effectively, you move an aura from one creature to another creature. There's Azumi, Lady of Scrolls. You tap an untap wizard you control to draw a card. Azusa, Lost But Seeking. You can play 2 additional land cards on your turn. Azusa is one of the more powerful cards that's actually in this deck that actually is really good. This is one I could recommend, especially if you're playing green and want to play a lot of lands. Ben Aki Hermit. You can tap it to deal damage to target attacking creature equal to the number of untapped mountains you control. Effectively, you can burn something if you have a lot of mana untapped when you tap Ben. Badoka Gardener. You can tap it to put a land from your hand into play. If you control 10 or more lands, you flip it into Dokai, Weaver of Life, who for 4 colorless and 2 green and tapping it, you create an XX elemental where X is the number of lands you control. There's Clingfall, Destroy All Enchantments. Cranial Extraction. You name a non-land card. You search target opponent's graveyard, library, and hand for all cards of that name and exile them. So you predict what your opponent might have, or if you've played them again before, you know something. You choose that name, and you just pick it out of their deck, pick it out of their hand, pick it out of their graveyard, and it's gone. There's Dawson, the Fallen Leaf. Players may play spells only during their turn. Well, play spells. 8.5 Tails. For a colorless and a white, target creature gains protection from white until end of turn. But for a colorless, target spell or permanent becomes white until end of turn. So you can make things white and then grant protection from white. Ethereal Haze. Prevent all damage that creatures would deal this turn. A little prevention in white. Ghostly Prison. This is actually colored shifted propaganda. It's if a creature an opponent control wishes to attack you, your opponent must pay 2 colorless mana for each said creature that would be attacking you. So if your opponent is going to attack you with 3 creatures, each of those he'd have to pay 2 colorless mana in order to attack you. That's 6 colorless mana for these 3 creatures in order to attack you. It's a good protector, forcing your opponent to pay mana to attack you. Graceful Adept. You have no maximum hand size. Hairstring Kodo. Tap an untapped creature you control. Target player puts the top card of their library in their graveyard. So you can mill people with a lot of creatures. Heartbreed of Spring. This is the color shift for Mana Flare. When a player would tap a land they control for mana, they add 1 mana of an appropriate type that land could produce to their mana pool, and this is beyond what it normally would add. So effectively, you double mana, not quite double because if something produces more than 1, but you double that normal production of 1 per land. It gets to 2 per land. Well, normally. Hold the line! Blocking creatures get +7/+7 until end of turn. Enough said. You get your blocking creatures really big. There's the Hodens of Life Edge. It's one of the Hodens I like. Now, at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a 1/1 colorless spirit token into play for each shrine you control, and it counts as a shrine. So even if you fill only this one out, you get a 1/1 white, 1/1 colorless spirit token each turn. It goes with the token for the Magic player's reward. Hoden of the Seeing Winds. This is another Hoden. You draw a card at the beginning of your upkeep for each shrine you have. So again, this is draw one extra card for just you. Or if you have more than one shrine, draw a couple of extra cards for just you. Glimpse of Nature. Whenever you play a creature spell this turn, you may draw a card. So if you play a bunch of little creatures, draw a bunch of cards. There was Gifts and Given. This one, you search your library for 4 cards of different name. You reveal them, and then target opponent chooses 2 of them. Those 2 are put to your graveyard, and the other 2 go into your hand. So effectively, you reveal 4 cards, and your opponent chooses 2 of them you don't get. Amy Statue. Players may not untap more than 1 artifact during their untap step. It shuts down things like Mirrored Index at this point in time if you're talking standard, or just shuts down artifacts. Journeyman's Kite. For 3 tap, this artifact allows you to search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. I can search for basic lands. Better in multicolored decks that you might need different basic lands. Also gives you some extra ones if you have the mana. Jushi Apprentice, which flips into Tomia the Revealer. Jushi Apprentice is 2 colorless and a blue, tap it, draw a card. If you have 9 or more cards in your hand, you flip it. And then Tomia the Revealer, 3 colorless, 2 blue, tap it. Target player draws X cards, where X is the number of cards in your hand. I actually like this one for my blue draw card deck because I can have no maximum hand size, draw most of my deck, and then force my opponent to repeatedly draw their hand until they have, well, no cards to draw. Kikijiki Mirror Breaker, another really good one. Tap, create a token copy of target non-legendary creature. That new token you created has haste, but it is exiled at the beginning of the next end step. So effectively you can use Kikijiki to double some kind of non-legendary creature until end of turn. There are so many combos with that, and that's one of the reasons that Kikijiki is pretty good also. There's Kiku, Nightflower. For 2 colorless, 2 black, and tapping Kiku, target creature deals damage to itself equal to its own power. So you can have something kill itself. There's Kodama's Reach. You search your library for 2 basic land cards, you reveal them, you put 1 into play, and put 1 into your hand. Kokusho the Evening Star, one of the spirit dragons, the 5/5 flyers. When Kokusho goes to the graveyard from play, each opponent loses 5 life. You gain life equal to the amount lost this way by opponents. If you're playing a whole bunch of other players and Kokusho dies, you gain a lot of life. Kondo, Lord of Yago. It's a 3/3. He is vigilant, indestructible, and he has Bushido 5. That means whenever he attacks or block, he becomes an 8/8. Normally he's just a 3/3 indestructible, but he also has vigilance. Masako the Humorless. She has Flash. You can play her anytime, you can play an instant. Your tapped creatures may block as though they were untapped. Effectively, it means that being tapped or untapped does not matter for your creatures. Meloku the Clouded Mirror, a 2/4 flyer that for 1 colorless, you may return a land you control to your hand to create a 1/1 blue spirit illusion token that has flying. Minamo, School at Water's Edge. You may tap it for a blue mana, or you can tap a blue and tap it to untap target legendary permanent. There's Nezumi Grave Robber. For a colorless and 8 black, you may remove target card from an opponent's graveyard from the game. If there are no cards in that graveyard, you flip Nezumi Grave Robber. And then it is Night Eye the Desecrator. For 4 colorless and a black, you may put a target creature card from a graveyard into play under your control. Night Eye is very powerful. I like her in a good graveyard resurrection deck. Knight of Soul's Betrayal, an enchantment that all creatures get -1/-1. Orochi Hatchery, an XX artifact that comes into play with X charge counters on it. For 5 and tap, you put X 1/1 green snake creature tokens into play, where, of course, X is equal to the number of charge counters on it. So you tap like 4 mana and 4 mana, and you get 4 charge counters, and for 5 mana, you get 4 snakes. Or if you have a lot of mana in a green deck, you get a lot of snakes with just 5 mana. Rito Lantern. For 3, Put target card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library. Reverse the sands. Redistribute any number of players' life totals. Each player, of course, ends up with a single life total, but if you're playing a single game, you might just switch your life total with an opponent's. Or if you're playing multiplayer, you just move everybody's life totals around until it seems appropriate. Whatever you want. Sachi, Daughter of Sechiro. Other snake creatures you control get +0/+1. And shamans you control get tap, add 2 green mana to your mana pool. Sakura Tribe Elder. You can sacrifice Sakura Tribe Elder to search your library for a basic land card and put it into play tapped. Really good in a green-black Graveyard Resurrection to get some more lands out, basic lands. Sensei's Divining Top. For 1, you may look at the top 3 cards of your library, put them back in any order. Or you can tap to draw a card, but you then put Sensei's Divining Top back on top of its owner's library. Sensei's Divining Top is uncommon and one of the most expensive cards in this set. It is very good. Seshiro the Anointed. Other snakes you control get +2/+2. When a snake you control would deal combat damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. Good for a snake deck. Shell Blast Kappa. For 3 tap, you may exile target instant or sorcery that targets you. You effectively remove it from the game. It effectively ends the effect. Then for 3 and tap, you may sacrifice Shell Blast Kappa to play one of the instants or sorceries exiled with Shell Blast Kappa without paying its mana cost. So you can exile a number of things targeting you, and then you could always sacrifice the shell to use one of these yourself on your opponents. Shisato, Whispering Hunter. At the beginning of your upkeep, you sacrifice a snake. But if Shisato deals combat damage to an opponent, that player skips their next untap phase. Yeah, that's a really good one. You get to sacrifice snakes to it. Put a roach to hatchery, cough cough. Sosuke, Son of Seshiro. Other snakes you control get +1/+0, and if a warrior you control would deal combat damage to a creature, destroy that creature. Tetsumaru, the Dragon's Fang. It's an equipment that equips 3 that target creature gets +5/+5. Or for 6, you may remove Tetsumaru, the Dragon's Fang from the game. You may exile to put a 5/5 flying Spirit Dragon into play. If that Spirit Dragon should leave play, you return Tetsumaru to play. So effectively you can change into a dragon. That dragon dies, you get the sword back. The Unspeakable, a 6/7 flying trample that if it deals combat damage to an opponent, you may return an arcane spell from your graveyard to your hand. Time of Need, you may search your library for a legendary creature, reveal it, and put it in your hand. Time Stop, the turn ends. All spells and abilities on the stack removed from the game, including the very spell Time Stop. Damage wears away. End of turn effects end. Whoever's turn it was discards down to their normal maximum hand size. The turn just ends. Uyo, the Silent Prophet. A 4/4 flyer that for 2 you may return 2 lands you control to their owner's hands, and you may copy an instant or sorcery spell, and of course that copy may have new targets. Yosei the Morning Star, another Spirit Dragon. A 5/5 flyer that when it's put into graveyard from play, target opponent skips their next untap phase. You may also tap 5 permanents that player controls. So you tap 5 of his things, and those 5 and everything else don't untap during the next untap phase. So that's it for today. I introduced you to Kamigawa. Kamigawa itself was still weaker than your average Magic set. It did have some great cards to it. Things that I can reflect that are really good to this day. But overall, the focus on Legends means that by itself, it was weaker. You needed to have Legends out, and you could only have one of a rare out at a time? The limiting factor of that is painful. It didn't have the power before. And the abilities, though interesting, maybe weren't necessary. Spirits and Arcane were an extra mechanic that really didn't function anywhere but here. Many other abilities, though pertaining to a setting, could function with other ones. Arcane just is something on its own which only appeared here. The levels of it, the levels of construction, means this set was overall weaker. And the fact is that Mirrodin and Ravnica, the 2 blocks which flanked it, were so popular and so good. It reflected badly on this set that almost seems mediocre, in fact. It wasn't a bad set. There are still so many good cards and good combinations. There are things in there that I can see even now, which would make great decks. A snake-themed deck? There's great cards for making a snake-themed deck. Snake Tribal. There are other ones that would be very powerful. Spirits especially. Even if you don't focus on the arcane aspect of it and some of the other more unique to Kamigawa abilities, just a plain spirit deck using Kamigawa is powerful still today, using it as a component to it. So you can see that, though it itself isn't a bad deck, because it was surrounded by such greatness, it suffered, and it didn't have the popularity. And of course, legends were a deal breaker for a lot. I can understand that. And flip cards, which are very unusual also. They were a predecessor for some of the shifting abilities of cards that have been seen since then. So they are a predecessor of something, but on their own. Strange. But that's it for today. If you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows your support for the channel, the Empire, the work you do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link description below. If you want to see some other great Magic the Gathering content, I can recommend Card Bazaar, They Said We Said, and Tasty Snackies. My friends of the multiverse, they do some great Magic the Gathering content, and I can recommend them. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.